again. I'm going to hand over very shortly to Charlie Bell to introduce the speaker more properly, but we'd just like to say thank you very much and a warm welcome. We're very glad to have you here.
Hi, so again, I'll reiterate how much of a pleasure it is for us to work with Trinity as well, and to have such an outstandingly overdone room to have our meeting. This evening, it's a great pleasure to welcome Neal, Lawson, who is the chair of conference. He previously worked for Gordon Brown and set up a Public Affairs company, but now works solely to make Britain a better place. I've been told to just let you all know that he's a very nice man.
It's true.
And on that, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlie, and thank you for organising this, and Stuart and Fabian for getting me from the station to here without getting lost, and for Lucy for letting us use her fantastic college. And thank you to you, because you're going to help me tonight, because what I'm going to talk about, and what I'm going to say is kind of half-formed. I'm in the middle of writing a pamphlet for the relaunch of my organisation, Compass, in April, and I've come to sort of test out some ideas. And that's partly, obviously, you know, me laying the terrain for excuse for babbling somewhat. But I want to know what you think about it, and I want you to help critique what I'm going to say. The pamphlet has the working title of The Wind and the Sun, which is a reference to the Aesop fable. I don't know if you know the fable, but it's the one where the wind and the sun bet on who could get the traveller to take their coat off. And the wind goes first, and the sun retreats behind the cloud, and the wind blows really, really hard. And what does the traveller do? They do their coat up tighter and tighter. And the sun comes out, shines brightly, warms the traveller up, and the traveller takes their coat off. And I'm using that as a metaphor for political change. But how do you make things happen? And I'll come back to that, and maybe you'll see some resonances. And so I'm talking about the kind of the politics of the good society. And I won't say very much about what a good society is, but I just think it's probably sort of slightly important just to say a couple of words about what I think a good society might be. The thing that gets me out of bed, the thing that makes me want to be active and work as a really nice person, as Charlie said, and it must be true if Charlie said it, to try and make Britain a better world, is because I really believe in people. I believe in their kind of their brilliance, their capacity, their creativity, their care, their cooperation, that they can do fantastic things. And I don't like a world in which people are humiliated, where their potential and capacity is denied, where they dance to other people's tunes and don't collectively make and shape their own world. I don't believe a good society is a place. We're very careful in Compass, and we kind of rigorously try to do this, because we talk about a good society, we don't talk about the good society. We really have to be really careful not to trample on other people's dreams. There are many different kinds of good society, and we should have a kind of, you know, a friendly competing battle about kind of a good society that we want to create. And what's important in that is not a destination. There's no blueprint. We know on the left what happens when we talk about blueprints. We start forcing people into that blueprint. It's really about a journey. It's about process. It's about better and better. It's about who you're on the journey with and what are the rules of engagement on that journey. So that says something about the kind of the notion of the good society as it matters to me and to Compass. Now, my thesis for this evening, I thought I'm in a Cambridge College, I ought to have a thesis. My thesis is that we're at a conjuncture. A conjuncture is a kind of big moment, a turning point, a big crisis. Politicians always say that we're at the crossroads because it's convenient for them. But actually this time I think we genuinely are. And conjunctures don't come along very often. They happened in, you could say 1945 was a moment of conjuncture, where the country decided to go off in a different direction. And you could say the late 70s, early 80s were a point of conjuncture where the country decided to go off in a different kind of direction. And I think that we're at that moment now, where there is a possibility of something fundamental happening to our politics and our society and our economy. We have a crisis of economy, like we're having a crisis of capitalism. We have a crisis of environment. And those two things, the fact that the poor are getting poorer and the planet burning leads to the third crisis, that of democracy and politics itself. Because if democracy and politics isn't solving the problem of the poor getting poorer and the planet burning, then it isn't doing its job. So we have these three crises. And what I want to talk about is why I see the Labour Party, which is the party I belong to, as not matching up yet to the possibilities of that crisis and of the conjuncture and of the possibility of the kind of transformatory change that I want to see happen. So I want to talk about why Labour seems incapable of matching the moment, why it was strong in the past and could do something at that last great conjuncture for it, 1945, what's happened, and what we need to do to try and make sure that we don't miss this opportunity. As I say, if they only come along every 30 or so years, then I think we should make blooming sure that we make the most of it rather than miss it. Because these things can go in lots of different directions. They can be progressive or they can become authoritarian. And the window can be open for a while. You know, I think the whole of the 1970s was a conjuncture of the death of one welfare model and the emergence of a new one. It took 10 years to kind of sort that out. I think we've got some time, but we need to start moving quite quickly in order to make up that time. So let me start with why I think my analysis of Labour and what you might call Labourism, about two kind of problems, the external crisis of Labour and the internal crisis of Labour, and the two things are linked. And we'll start by going back to that last moment, 1945, and just to remind ourselves why it was that Labour was so strong in 1945, why it was able to make transformative change, to build the NHS, the welfare state, full employment, nationalisation, all the things that we love and hold dear. Why it was able to do that? Well, because there was a huge working class, a kind of mobilised agency that was there, had a self-identity, would vote accordingly and act accordingly in order to help propel Labour into government. That was combined with what was called kind of a Fordist mode of production, the Ford motor plant, that organised production conveyor belt line, you know, where that both gave the space where the working class could grow, but it also gave a model of organisation, of regimented, regularised, which was right for cars as it was for public administration. The civil service, everything could be run like a bureaucracy. And that crystallised the moment when you could do big things via that kind of model of change. 1945 was also a moment of the nation state. You could run a national economy within nation-state boundaries. You could decide your tax levels, your interest rate levels, you know, etc. You could manage your economy within the boundaries of the nation-state. Really important. Obviously, 1945, memories of the war, a moment when culturally we were all in it together. There was no going back to the kind of pre-war 1930s, you know, divided Britain. We'd beaten the Nazis and the fascists together. Everyone did their bit. We all pulled together, and people wanted that to continue. Really important cultural moment. There was a kind of zeitgeist of rationalism, of the men and women in white all knew best. The white-coated technologists. Everything could be rationalised. Everything could be managed. Central planning would work. We trusted that more than the market, which links to the last bit about, and probably to me one of the most important bits, of why Labour used to be strong, and that was the existence of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, and we forget this now, was a massive, massive part in strengthening the Labour movement and the Labour Party in Britain, because there was an alternative that everyone believed at the time would overtake the West, that was more efficient and more effective. That brought the employers, the capitalists to the table to negotiate with the workers and the Labour Party a better deal for the working class because they wanted to buy them off. They didn't want a revolution, so we gave them stuff. And all of those factors combined in a kind of not very kind of organised or systemic way, but nevertheless a sense that kind of history was on our side. And that we didn't have a kind of blueprint or a plan, but there was generally a kind of social democratic or socialist alternative. And if you kept knocking on enough doors and delivering enough leaflets and electing enough Labour MPs, then gradually, slowly, you would move towards socialism. And that's what motivated the party, and the movement. That's what gave us that 1945 moment. And do you know what? Every single bit of it has gone. Every single bit. Everything that made the party strong then no longer exists in any real meaningful sense. And I think the Labour Party is living off the vapours of that moment, trying to recreate it, trying to elect the right people into government so that they can be this generation's Attlee, Morrison, Bevan, etc. And I'm not sure it's going to work. And I can, you know, working class and class still matters, but nowhere near in the way that it once did. The Fordist system of production has given way to a much more dispersed form of capitalism. The nation state clearly now usurped by the kind of global flows of capital. Memories of the war not really relevant to anyone in the country anymore because virtually no one really directly experienced it. Rationalism given way to postmodernism, and of course the collapse of the Soviet Union, absolutely complete and total, and that kind of alternative model. So, it's that external environment has sapped the Labour Party and the movement of its strength, and then that played into an internal crisis. Because if all of that external strength has gone, then I think what happened to the party was it made up for it by internally becoming harder, firmer. We haven't got all that external strength, so we'll huddle in, and we'll command, and we'll control, and we'll tell people what to do, and the internal democracy and vibrancy of the party will go, that the kind of pluralism of the party will go, the feminists, the internationalists, the peace people, the academics, the doubters, the thinkers, the talkers, the debaters. There's no room for that because we haven't got this external strength. So we have to tighten up. We have to control everything. We have to kind of clamp down on any kind of different views and different kind of voices to make ourselves stronger so that we can capture the state and do what happened in 1945. And I think the party has become, you know, shrivelled, drier, less interesting, less relevant, full of hacks and, you know, careerists rather than dreamers, you know, debaters, thinkers and transformers. And I think that external crisis and that internal crisis go hand in hand. And we have a Labour Party that effectively, we will make it happen. And I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a minute. And it's not just in Britain. The last election, Labour got 29% of the vote. In France, he may be president, but in the first round, Hollande only got, you guessed it, 29% of the vote. At the last election in Germany, the SPD got 23%. In Sweden, Spain, Italy, you name it, Social Democrats are out of power. They're out of power for a reason, because the underlying strength and vitality of social democracy has drained away over the years. Now, that's almost the bad news over. It gets slightly worse for two reasons, two important reasons, which I think are interlinked. The first one is the environmental agenda. That essentially, social democracy and Labour were born in an era where what mattered was more money and more stuff for people. Housing, food, clothing, etc. And I think that's now problematic, because actually most people don't need more of that to subsist. They need more of it in relative terms because we live in a consumer society and that you identify yourself in relation to others. You know, the size of your television, you know, screen matters as a kind of marker of success. But that's problematic for two reasons. Firstly, because climate change, which comes out in part of all of that kind of turbo-consumerism, affects the poor first. Rising food prices, rising fuel prices, and eventually rising seas will always hit the poor first. So there's a kind of pressing urgency about the kind of politics of more, of just more stuff anyway. And the second reason is that actually that kind of individualistic consumer society just completely undermines the basis of social solidarity you need for a kind of more equal, democratic and sustainable world. Who cares as long as you can buy more stuff? And we just give people more stuff, and then that undermines the basis for any kind of connection, any kind of social fabric, and I think that's really problematic. The second thing that's happened since, you know, all of those other forces declined is that the way that kind of people operate and do things at home, with their friends, at work, in politics has changed dramatically. We've moved from this kind of hierarchical, vertical way of doing things, where everyone was ordered and everyone knew their place and the centre commanded over everywhere else and it was all top down. We took our orders in the party. We lived in a much more kind of deferential world. That world has kind of gone or going. And the new energies and the new vitality and the new ways that people want to do things are much more horizontal, much flatter. And we all want a voice and we all want to say. From Facebook and tweeting to all sorts of ways in which we now want to express ourselves. And that causes a kind of party and a movement based on hierarchy and authority and centralism, real problems. Because where the new energies are about, mutuals and social ownership, cooperatives, all sorts of things are ways in which people want to have an expression, want to say, don't fit with that old kind of model. And maybe there's a connection between those two things. There's a connection between the environment and the green issue and the subsistence issue and the hierarchy. Because I think people accepted hierarchy when it was about subsistence. If it was about putting more food on the table, then you would accept the orders and you would do your job and deliver the leaflets and knock on the doors and get the MPs, because that meant more food on the table. Now most people have gone beyond subsistence. They're not willing to accept that kind of hierarchy. They want a voice and they want a say. And the Labour Party isn't very good at giving people a voice and a say, because actually what it wants to reproduce is that 1945 moment. Elect us, we'll then occupy the state, and we'll pull the levers on your behalf, and you'll be very grateful. That, in a sense, is still the operating model, and I'm not sure it works. So, to begin to sort of get towards a conclusion, Charlie, if you're worrying I'm going to go on too long. I think the analysis I've just provided begins to suggest some kind of way forward. And there are two really crucial elements to that, to me, for a Labour Party that is going to have a transformative capacity in this conjuncture. Not just a kind of humanised view of neoliberalism, not just slowing things down, but actually doing what we did in 1945, transforming the agenda. The first point is to move beyond the politics of more. Of saying that all we will do is, you've got a 32-inch colour television screen, the Tories promise you 36 and we'll give you 42, right? We've got to move beyond the politics of that. I know that some people need more money, right? Okay, and that's really important. But actually, when is enough for Social Democrats of material wealth? When is enough? I think it's a really important question. Because when do we want actually more of other things, not just money to go and buy things that we don't really want, probably with money we don't really have, because lots of people have made us want and desire things through magazines and adverts and whatever else. That isn't my definition of the good life and the good society, dancing to the tune of, consumer society. What other things can we give people more of? More time, more autonomy, more public spaces, more love, more care. A whole load of different more things, which I think speak to us as human beings in a way that a bigger colour television screen doesn't necessarily. And I think we've got to move into that kind of politics very strongly and very firmly. And the other thing we've got to do is the cultural thing of just learning something else. We've got to learn to trust people. We've got to learn to realise and believe that socialism is not what Labour governments do, but what people do themselves, collectively. How do they come together and make a better world? What are the structures and places and cultures which enable people to become the authors of their own life collectively? And Labour finds that very difficult to let go and to trust, because again, everything is about the offer is, we're really good, we know how to deliver, vote for us and we'll deliver for you. We've got to give up on that and move beyond that. Into a much richer form of, as I say, autonomy, participation, people becoming the authors of their own life. And that's where my organisation Compass kind of, fits itself, between recognising that we need not just kind of red and green politics to be kind of one added to the other, but a kind of really rich synthesis of the two, a very different form of politics. A kind of parliamentary and an extra parliamentary, to recognise that we are going to need something akin to something like the Labour Party to stand in elections and win state power, but it's only got a very limited role, a necessary role, an important role, but certainly not sufficient. That you need a much bigger, broader alliance of organisations, of these kind of flat, horizontal structures, which contain within them a real sense of egalitarian politics, because you can have a voice and you can have a say. And that's problematic because those organisations tend to be slower in the way they operate, because they have to kind of arrive at a consensus. They have to negotiate their way forward. And the good thing about the hierarchy, if you like, is they tend to be really hard, really firm and really fast. And somehow we've got to get a set of rules which respect the need for people to take time to deliberate, to discuss, to come up with democratic negotiated answers and not just be crushed by the old kind of hierarchical systems. The optimism for me in all of this is that I kind of see that old social democratic past as a blip, as a moment in time created by the culture, the means of production. You don't have to be incredibly Marxist to believe that the way in which society or the economy produces stuff then has a dramatic effect on the social structure. There's a link between the two. And if the kind of mode of production is that kind of Fordist, bureaucratic, clanking top-down, it's going to produce a kind of centralised, clanking top-down form of politics. Well, that era's gone. And I think we're in a much more kind of interesting, vibrant, dispersed, participatory form of politics, of which the internet and technology are the driving forces. And they can be driving forces for progressive politics, or they can be driving forces for authoritarian politics. In a sense, they're value neutral, but they give us an opportunity to do something. And I think that ties in with, in essence, this Labour's preoccupation and desire to reproduce that 45 moment is really the reproduction of a myth. Because 1945 wasn't really just about Clem Attlee and Nirem Bevan and Morrison and etc. If you go back and look at the way 45 actually happened, David Markham, the historian, describes it as a century-long conversation between liberals, socialists, ethical socialists, the whole kind of debate, trade unionists, friendly societies, clarion cycle clubs, left-wing book clubs. There was a rich, amazing tapestry of ideas, forces and organisation coming out of the Chartists and all sorts of places, which created that moment in 1945 that somehow has got pickled into this view that it was just a few Labour politicians at the top who made it happen, and it wasn't. It was much richer and much deeper than that. And we need to recognise now that if we want to make change happen, we have to kind of look back to our history and work out how it happened before, which is much richer, much deeper. Keynes was a liberal. Beveridge was a liberal. These ideas that kind of founded the kind of world that we believe in and love came from all sorts of places. And we're going to have to open up to all sorts of places and all sorts of ways. And I'll finish on this, Charlie. Look, the point at the moment is that we live in a utopia. The problem is it's not our utopia. It's the utopia of the people who at the last conjuncture in the 1970s had the ambition, the drive, the verve, the wit, the imagination to make the most of the moment. And that, of course, was the New Right, the neoliberals. They made the most of that moment because they were organised, they thought, they planned, they dreamed, they had a sense of purpose. I think we should learn from those people, have the same sense of purpose, the same drive, the same belief in humanity and other people. Not just to kind of adapt ourselves to their utopia, because that won't work. We'll just kind of continue to run into the sand, but to dream and think about a different kind of world, to mix the desirable and the feasible into something that will transform our country. As I say, these moments don't come around very often, and they don't last forever, but it will last for a bit longer. It gives us a moment and a time to do something. I think we should just get on and make the most of it. Thank you.
So I think we open the floor and continue the conversation, really. The floor is yours.